Hello, everyone, and welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lir Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And my very special guest, a woman I've been really interested in talking to, is Peninah Zilberman, currently living in Israel, originally from Haifa in Israel, but is the founder of a wonderful organization. Hello, Peninah.
Hello, how are you?
How are you doing?
Thanks. Okay, I'm in Israel, and first and foremost, I want to thank you for inviting me to take part in your program.
My honor.
And I'm honored as well on both sides.
We were talking before we went on camera about the weather there and what it's like. Are you going into lockdown tonight, did you say?
It is possible. We don't know yet. In a couple of hours, we will know.
Are there many deaths or many people getting?
We don't. The total number of deaths since it started on March the 10th is the date that we started our first lockdown. And since then, we have about 1,200 deaths.
Yeah.
But the problem is that every day there's about anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000 people who are being identified carrier and sick.
Yeah. I'm just looking here to try and find the name. It was going through my head of your organization in Sighet. How do you pronounce it? The organization you set up.
Tarbut. In Romanian, it sounds Fundația Tarbut Sighet, Cultură și Educație Iudaică, which means Tarbut is a Hebrew word, which means culture. So it's the foundation of Jewish culture in Sighet, and it's in Iudaica, in Judaism. And so that's basically the name. And the reason why we chose this name was, number one, the location itself has great significance related to Holocaust, which we can speak about it later. And the other reason is because the subject of Holocaust, since I started to be working on the matter, which is a couple of decades ago, I always taught through culture. My feeling from an educational point of view is that students can always read the history or watch a movie, but what's very important is the culture, the Jewish culture that has been lost.
Yeah.
It was a very highly cultural life that the Jews led all over Europe prior to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And there's so much emphasis about the atrocities and the Holocaust itself that people forget that we had a life before.
Absolutely. The music, the literature, the dance, the singing, everything, the art. That exactly. I suppose that resonates with me in particular with a book called The Diary of Peter Ginz, who was a young Czechoslovakian Jew who was sent to Theresienstadt, and he set up a little he set up a little magazine there called Venom, and he used to go around interviewing people in the camp and that. But he also did a lot of paintings, and he did a painting called Moon Landscape. And the first Israeli astronaut, Ilan Raman, when he was going on the space shuttle Columbia, brought Peter's painting with him. And on its when it was coming back to land on Earth, the space shuttle exploded. And all on board, as you know, were killed.
Of course.
And that would have been Peter Ginz's 75th birthday had he lived, that the space shuttle exploded. But he was an artist, he was a writer, he was a poet, he was a journalist, and he was just one child, and the amount of talent that was lost, not just lives, but the amount of talent that these people had that was lost during the Holocaust.
Yes, 1.5 million of children out of 6 murdered. Speaking of Terezin or Theresienstadt, over there, the arts, it was a very artsy camp.
It was, yeah.
Children used to participate in the Wunderbar opera.
That's right, yeah.
So, you know, and as a matter of fact, in Toronto, you mentioned this magazine. One of the other boys who took part on writing this magazine was a survivor in Toronto.
He what?
He was a survivor in Toronto. He passed away a couple of years ago. So I met him. So
I'd love to have met him, because a friend of mine, she's the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. He survived 5 camps, and he moved to Israel when the war ended, and he was in the IDF, and then he moved to Canada, and they now, well, he's dead. He died 3 years ago, but they moved to Toronto.
Oh,
so, yeah. So she's
very nice. Yeah, Toronto had a lot of survivors.
Yeah.
And I was the director of the Holocaust Museum in Toronto for 10 years.
Oh, that's right. I read that in your bio. But Signet. That was very synonymous with survivors of the Holocaust, and people who had survived Jews who had survived communism and survived the Holocaust and survived other genocide and other pogroms throughout the centuries.
Sighet especially is synonym with Professor Elie Wiesel.
Yeah.
Professor Elie Wiesel was born in Sighet.
Yeah.
September 30th, 1928. He was one of the Nobel Prize winners in 1986. His house is right in the center of Sighet, and it has turned into a memorial house for the memory of all the Jews in the region. The region is called Maramuresh. So it has, you know, exhibits. People from all over the world are coming, and it's under the auspices of the local museums of the city, of the municipalities.
But you're the daughter of 2 survivors.
Right. I'm the daughter of, my mother was born on March the 7th, 1926 in Sighet. And she was deported on one of the dates between May 16 to 22nd, 1944 to Auschwitz, and stayed in Auschwitz until the death marches at the end of December of 1944. She survived the marches together with her younger sister by 4 years, and they arrived to Bergen-Belsen. My aunt was quite sick. My mother sort of tried to revive her, and she was successful. And on the 15th of April, 1945 is when the British army came to Bergen.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that Toba Abramczyk in Toronto, Toba's dad was on the death marches as well. One of the camps he was in was Auschwitz-Birkenau. And he was in, as far as I can remember, he was in, he wasn't in Theresienstadt. I think he was in Majdanek. He was in 5 camps anyway, and the last of which was Auschwitz. But he was on the death march as well.
Yeah, It was a very hard march because that winter was one of the most extreme weather. And people really, there were no boots, there were no shoes, there were no coats. It's really a miracle whoever survived. So that's my mother. But my father came from Bucharest, the capital of Romania,
Yeah.
which people were not deported, but there was a pogrom on the 21st of January for 2 days. As it happens, they were not affected because they were in the more assimilated, higher Jewish society, and they got a warning. And the warning was for my grandfather: you go in the basement and you do not get out of there. Whatever you hear happens in the house or on the street. However, my father was recruited as a Jew because there were curfews every day between 4 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock in the morning to be part of a group of men that would collect the dead bodies. So he did have some kind of a trauma due to this job or assignment that he...
Was your dad a Sonderkommando?
No, no, no. Sonderkommandos were only in Auschwitz.
Yeah. No, because it was the trauma that must have been experienced by people having to collect dead bodies.
Right.
Must have been.
This was a different kind, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these were my parents. And my parents were not the type, my mother was not the type to talk about the event. She would speak about life before. So
yeah.
if holiday will come up, she will tell me, oh, for this holiday, we will cook these types of foods, we will bake. She told me how they would celebrate the Sabbath. They were 8 children, 6 boys and 2 girls. So they survived, the 2 girls and 1 more boy. But today, nobody is anymore around from them.
But it's amazing, that was her way of coping. That was her
exactly.
coping mechanism. Everyone, some people will talk ad nauseum about their experiences. Other people won't talk at all, and some people then use humor. I mean, I interviewed a friend, a colleague of mine in Irish dancing yesterday, and he was 11 when his mom died and 17 when his dad died, and he became emancipated and he adopted his 3 brothers and sisters so that he could get them to Canada.
Oh, really?
And he is the funniest man ever. And his wife and I were only talking about how he uses humor to have got him through. It is what actually helped him to get through. And a lot of Holocaust survivors that I've interviewed found the same, that, you know, Jewish people tend to be very, very funny and very artistic and creative, and they use the arts, they use humor as a way of either telling their story or forgetting it.
Correct, yeah. So my mother, because she used to be a dressmaker,
Okay.
and she loved fashion and beauty. She would always get dressed very nicely until my early 20s. All the clothing she would sew for me, and of course I would design it. That was so funny. Even for the graduation class, we went and we bought a specific material and I designed it. And she loved to cook and bake, so she expressed herself through this.
Yeah.
Yeah, she loved politics. She was very smart. But due to the times, she ended up being a dressmaker. But
everyone needs a dressmaker.
Yeah.
But Peninah, I'm just looking at that 4th generation.
Yes.
You know, I mean, when you look at what was lost during World War II, lost in the Holocaust, from all sides, you know, both Jewish and Gentiles that were lost. and you think that but for your parents being able to survive, that little chap wouldn't have been around today.
Exactly. I wouldn't.
You wouldn't have been around.
That's my whole looking at this whole subject. You see, I feel that I'm a bit, I belong to a smaller group of second generation. There is not too many of us that look at our parents' survival as a triumph and victory.
Yes, yes, yes.
And taking that aspect of victory and triumph, I took it upon myself to make sure that I take this step one step further and make out of it something big. Not to go into the feelings of down days and being depressed and all this. Unfortunately, we have many second generations that feel very depressed and low, and some of them don't even work and they're on medication, and the picture is not very very pink or very good. Now, I must explain what a second generation means. That is a child who was born from June 1945 till 1955 is the first initial children that were born by our parents that in a way they made their life. It didn't matter if the man or the woman is a good match or it's not a good match. The urge of the survivor was that he or she must restart the family.
Yes, yes, yes.
The family.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Peninah, because Toba, again, she said her parents, her father always talked about his experiences. Her mother wasn't a survivor, but her mother is Jewish also. But she said they built their whole world around their family and around their children, and the family that they had in Toronto tended to be all survivors and children of survivors, second generation, because they all shared more with each other probably than any normal blood relative would generally share with each other. But I read a book by a survivor, a child of survivors, called Ruth Eisenstein. And it's in graphic form. It's a graphic novel or a graphic memoir. And it's called I Was a Child of Holocaust Survivors. And she talks about how her parents' survival of the Holocaust could never be compared with, and nothing she would ever do in her life would ever be as heroic. And she said it was almost like a drug to her. It was like somebody was injecting, she called it H, into my veins, and I had to get more of it and more of it to find my mother's and my father's story. And so she never knew where their lives ended and hers began, because she was just so wrapped up in their stories. Did you find that, Peninah, that you felt completely compelled, or that you feel your life is just controlled by remembering the past and trying to remember it in a creative way? Because you're clearly a creative person.
Some parts of it is the fact that I established the foundation is one of the things. It's in memory of my late mother's family, but also of all the Jews from Siget and Maramurish, the region, who were murdered, killed, starved, etc. So it is part of my life, my everyday life. I wake up in the morning, I read, I write. You see, I'm on TV here. Now with the Zoom, around Yom HaShoah, the day of remembrance, when we observe in May, or other dates, the 27th of January, now the international date. Always busy, like it is part of my life, but the thing is that it doesn't put me down. I see it as a mission.
Yeah.
An important mission, and it's even transferred to my eldest son. I have 3 children, and my eldest son is the one who is mostly into it. I took my 3 children and 3 grandchildren to Seagate. I brought them there to be part of the big gatherings that we have done almost every year in the past 5 years. So I showed them, again, the roots, but not in a hurtful way where it affects them negatively.
In a way that actually helps them rather than burdens them with too much of a past that they could never imagine. Even, I mean, the survivors and the victims themselves found it hard to imagine that level of atrocity that was inflicted on them. So it's almost, it would be impossible for you, even as a second generation, or me. I mean, I found out halfway through my master's on Shoah studies that my great-great-grandmother was Jewish. I didn't know. I knew that there was this burning ambition to tell or to make some contribution, but I didn't know where it was coming from. And I just feel like you, I feel that it is what I'm destined to do, is to try and do my little bit to try and tell the story. But at what stage did your parents move to Israel?
Oh, right. Okay. Before that, I have a point I want to mention. One of the interesting things that most of us, second generation, are going through is that we felt that if our parents do not speak naturally about the event, we did not want to ask them because they would be sad, like my mother. The minute she would start, yes, the picture, the minute she would start to talk about the event, she would right away cry. However, listen to this interesting phenomena, not just in our home, but in other homes. It skips a generation. My daughter, who is now, bless her heart, till 40 years old, she would speak to my mother, and my mother would tell her.
Can you go back? Sorry, can you go back? How old is she?
40.
Oh yeah, I thought you said 140 years old.
No.
I thought you were talking.
Okay. So she told, my mother told my daughter the story. So it skips a generation, it's easier.
Yeah, I think everything's generation.
Yeah, now let's go back to your question. You asked me, when did I start all this?
No, when did your parents
arrive to Israel, right?
In 1945, or did they?
No. The story is like this.
47, I should say.
Once my mother was liberated from Bergen-Belsen, she and her sister were extremely sick with tuberculosis. So other women were taken on the white boats. That was a project of the Red Cross, Sweden. So they were taken from Bergen-Belsen, which is very close to the harbor of Hamburg, across to Sweden. And there, her group was stationed at a monastery, and the nurses took care of these women, about 20, 30 women. Now, it took until 1948 that they started to feel better. Now, in this monastery, the Swedish people did a marvelous job. They recuperated physically, emotionally, and professionally. Each one, they developed their profession. They were thinking, what are these girls going to do in the future? So my mother and her sister arrived in Israel on May 22nd, 1948.
Wow.
And my father, I told you what he did in Bucharest. After the war, he started to walk towards the Hungarian border, cross the border from Hungary to Austria, and there in DP camps, displaced people camps, he started to study from ORT. ORT is an organization that is teaching technical profession for males.
Okay.
So he taught to be electrician. So that's how he started to have his first profession. And he was on the same boat as my mother and her sister, and they met. And my aunt met also her husband, a Romanian man, on the boat. So when they arrived in Haifa, they were already two couples.
Wow.
Married a bit later.
Well, a friend of mine, I've become very friendly with him. He received an International Person of the Year award here in Ireland, Tommy Reichenthal. Tommy was a survivor of Bergen-Belsen. He was 9 when he was released from Bergen-Belsen. So he probably was in the same camp as your parents, but he was there around the time of Anne Frank, but she would have been in a different section. And he was adopted by Dr. Bob Collis here in Ireland, who founded the Cerebral Palsy Clinic in Ireland, but was one of the medical liberators of the camp. And because Zoltan's, I'm talking about Zoltan, I should say, Zoltan's in Collis, his mother died just as they were leaving the camp, and Dr. Bob Collis adopted him. But Tommy Reichenthal was in Bergen-Belsen at the same time as well. You know, so it's amazing the amount of people I've been speaking to who have some connection with Bergen-Belsen. And Zoltan had TB of the spine. So, like your parents, wasn't it? They were
my mother and her sister.
Yeah.
They had tuberculosis, and actually, just before she died, it spread all over her body. So it was in remission for close to 60 years, and then all of a sudden it bursted.
Wow. So they moved in 1948 to Israel.
Yes, and we lived in Israel from, they from 48. I was born in 1950, August the 4th. And we were in Israel until March 31st, 1969.
Okay.
And in 69, we moved to Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah. And my parents came back to Israel in 89, but unfortunately my mother died within 2 years, and my father didn't want to stay here in Israel by himself. I'm an only child.
I am too.
Yeah. So, you know, it's extra responsibility, not just
yeah.
We are one. And so he came back to Toronto, and he lived there another 10 years. Actually, it's very interesting. He died on the eve of Yom Kippur, which is weekend. It's going to be 10 years.
Yeah.
So he lived another 10 years in Toronto back. And
what effect had it on him? I know, because when I was talking to Zoltan, I went up to his home, and he had a cat, and he loved his cat, and he said he could relate to the cat because the cat was solitary, and he could never tell his wife or children what he had gone through, and he never spoke about it till after he retired from his job. And the same with Tommy. Tommy never spoke about it until after he retired as well. And but Zoltan said that he didn't like the sound of showers, and he didn't like the word heraus or herain or the German accent or planes flying overhead. They always were triggers. For Toba, whose father was towards the end of his life, had Alzheimer's, he was constantly trapped in the camps and, you know, and petrified of showers. Were there triggers for your parents, or were they able to block you from knowledge of the trauma?
A very interesting question. They really never, you know, children, you don't need to a child to talk a lot and tell. A child absorbs.
Yeah.
I did absorb some things. My father was an army person. For him, he would just talk, always the discussion around the table, around the house, with friends, with neighbors, would be about wars. He did fight in 1948 in the War of Independence in Israel. He fought in 1956, the Suez Canal War. And he fought also in 1967, the Six-Day War. So he was immersed in all these things. So he would speak about it. One of the things that I was trained, I call it trained, is safety. Now, I grew up in a village, like a farm. And in those days, Arabs from the villages would come and infiltrate. I mean, I'm talking about the 50s, okay?
Yeah.
So he taught me how to handle the door, the key, where to hide, what to do. And I'm just 6, 7 years old, okay?
So it continues.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. For me personally, the color yellow, I never liked the color yellow, maybe till about 10 years ago. I would never touch yellow. I will not paint. I will not draw, nothing with yellow. Now, of course, it comes from the yellow star.
Yeah.
I don't like black boots.
Yeah.
I can't hear them.
Yeah,
okay? Now, and I wasn't there, but you see, when I go into a house or in a restaurant, I usually check where is the first door in case I need to go out.
Wow.
These are now today, I mean, I'm 70 years old. I'm not so careful about it anymore, but there was a time in my younger age when I was very much aware of these things. I'm no longer so much aware. I kind of take things the way they are. It definitely left me with some scars of this nature.
Yeah, I mean, Toba talks about, I was saying it to Toba about Art Spiegelman wrote a wonderful book. I don't know.
Mouse 1 and 2.
Mouse. It's a wonderful book. And I mean, he really actually managed to portray his parents and Jews in the way, in the stereotype that they would have been seen as, and the
correct
pigs and the French as frogs, and that's the stereotype that they would have been seen as. But the fact that he never got on with Vladek, his father, and Vladek couldn't get on with Anya, his wife, because they had so much in common. They probably were a constant reminder to each other of what they had gone through and what they had suffered. But he used to constantly go around with bread in his pocket, or he'd steal a plastic container at the bedside in a hospital because he never knew if he'd get another one. And Toba told me, to the day he died, even with Alzheimer's, she'd be going through her dad's pockets. Meyer Abramczyk was his name, and there'd be pieces of bread inside in his pocket, because he never knew if he was, and he was living in Toronto. He was, it's only 3 years ago that he died, 3 or 4 years ago he died, and I mean, he was all that length of time from World War II in either Israel or Toronto, but he still carried the bread around in his pocket, and it's that kind of inbuilt survival or attempt at survival.
Yes, it's very hard to go away. I was among the lucky ones that the parents of my father were alive, my grandparents, and they brought me up here in Israel. Grandma did not go through the Holocaust. However, one of her thoughts to me were, never leave the house without an apple. And I asked her, but Grandma, why do we need an apple? Well, you never know if you have food where you go or if you get to come home. So even she, who did not go in the full sense of a Holocaust, but stayed in the city under other conditions, still instilled in me the thought, don't leave the house without an apple. And guess what? I instilled that in my kids. And grandfather, the eldest one that is 21, she laughs at me, but she says, well, Bobby, you say it, so I'll keep it with me.
Do you think that that is why food is so important in Jewish culture? I mean, I know it seems to be, food seems to be important in many, many ethnic cultures like Judaism, and in amongst Italians and Irish. And I mean, the Irish don't think you'll ever have enough to eat. And small groups of people, or indigenous people, or that, do you think that that contributed to Jewish people's love of food? Everything, every celebration is around food. Yom Kippur, Passover,
Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah, everything.
Hanukkah.
Well, I'll tell you what, we are, beside being the people of the book, the way we are being known,
yeah,
but we are also the people of the family. And family is very important.
yeah,
Food, beside being nourishing, is a ritual.
yeah,
Because you have a recipe, you go over it, you transmit the recipe. Every bride in the more religious groups is given the recipe of the family for a gefilte fish, that is fish cakes, you know, and is given the recipe of the honey cake and this and that. My grandmother also, before I got married, took me, I still have that book, and dictated specific recipes of the family. It brings us together. The table around, and you sit and you eat. Again, is a time for telling stories, for asking the younger kids to say, what did you learn at school? How do you feel? You know, so food is an attractive concept that keeps us together, and also keeps us remembering of back home. Where
the family that eats together stays together.
You're true. Yes.
But tell me about your organization.
Sure.
How has it? You know, it seems so interesting to me. I mean, I'm an art graduate, but who then went on and did literature, and specifically children's Holocaust literature, with children as a central focus. So it's not just, they're not all aimed at children. They're all, the books that I looked at, they're all based on childhood under Nazism, what they can be read. Some of them are specifically children's books, others aren't. But childhood under Nazism is the central focus. But why did you choose to focus on, which is an incredibly interesting area of remembrance through creativity? Because I really believe, some people believe that there was no poetry after Auschwitz. And I don't agree at all. I think any method, I teach drama as well, so I think any method of getting the story out. Some people love to read, some people just don't like to read. And I'm hoping that my interviews will help people who don't really like to read or wouldn't read a Holocaust book or wouldn't read a history book, but they listen to Peninah talking about her experiences, or they learn about it through a play, or they learn about it through a tapestry or a painting or a poem. So whatever way you have of teaching about the Holocaust and getting it through to people of different types, I think is ultimately important. Is that what you felt?
Yes, I felt just about the same the way you described. I consider myself an artsy person.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I don't paint or I do sing. And I sang in the choir in elementary school here in Israel, and the director of the choir, German survivor, wanted to send me to develop my voice. However, my father was a very conservative man, and he did not feel that that's the right thing to do. I should mention that survivors did not see in the arts a profession.
Yeah.
Used to say you want to be a Luftmensch. A Luftmensch, mensch means
Mensch is a good person.
A man, yeah, and Luft means wind. In other words, you want to be a wind person, meaning you don't have a proper profession where you get paid and you have money to buy a house to establish yourself. So many of us did not develop the artsy talents that we had only later on in life.
But it was there.
Definitely, it was there.
It was instinctive. It was innate in those who were. I mean, you look at Yitzhak Perlman. I would give anything to be able to interview that man. I would just give anything. He's just my idol when it comes to as a violinist.
I'd be able to help you, but let's leave that aside for now.
Oh, I don't think I'll be able to sleep tonight.
Oh,
I've been all over the place trying to find contacts for him and everything, and it's just, it's impossible.
It is hard. Okay, so let's leave that aside. So I was singing. I sang in choirs in synagogues, at children's camps, etc., etc. Now, the reason why I came up with the idea to establish the foundation in Romania through the arts, twofold. Number one, we should be aware that Romania only took upon, as a government, took upon itself the responsibility that there was a real Holocaust in Romania for the Jewish people. Now, pre-1939, we'll say it that way, there were 870,000 Jews, almost 1 million of Jews. They did not take responsibility only in the year 2002, which is only 18 years ago. And the main reason why Romania finally, the government at the time, agreed to take responsibility is because they wanted to be part of the EU. There is a clause, if you want to be part of the EU, you have to take responsibility if you had a Holocaust during World War II or you didn't.
Yeah.
So what they did in the year 2000, they assigned Professor Elie Wiesel to write a report, and in the year 2002, he presented them with the report, and following that, now the government, not just that it recognizes, it has a national day of observance. October the 9th is the national day in Romania. And the reason is because in the region of Bukovina, which is in the eastern side of Romania, most Jews there were deported to a zone that today is in Ukraine named Transnistria.
Okay.
The Dniester is a river, and trans means over the Dniester. That's where about 400,000 were sent there. And very few came back. So there are two regions in Romania that the Holocaust happened, is northern Transylvania that was deported to Auschwitz, and the Bukovina area in the eastern side was deported to Transnistria.
Okay.
I used to come to Romania. I came the first time in 98, 10 years after the revolution. The revolution was in December 25th, 1989. I came 10 years later. By the way, my grandmother taught me the culture, the language. I know how to read, to write, everything. So.
In Romanian?
Yes, in Romania.
A relative of mine adopted two children around that time from Romania, a brother,
yes.
weren't brother and sister, but they were in the orphanage together after Ceausescu.
Exactly.
And she adopted a little boy and a little girl.
Very nice. Many, many children there spread in United States or anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
So I loved to spend time in Romania. And when I came in the summer of 2013, I was saying to myself, wait a minute, next year is going to be 70 years since deportations. I want to do something.
Yeah.
I went to the mayor. He was on vacation. It was summer. And I spoke to a deputy. She said to me, well, we'll get back to you. Didn't get back to me till the following February 2014. Anyways, to make the story short, within 3 months until May, I was able to bring 150 people from all over the world to come to observe this event. So when we finished the event, people said, so what's next? What are you going to do? So that's how I decided to establish the foundation. As you can see in the pictures behind you, I am at schools. Because I speak the language, I go to the schools, I tell the story of the family, of the region, and we also do literary exercises. I bring sections of books and we read and we make our own endings or beginnings, or I've already produced 2 plays there.
Excellent.
And it's not just in Sziget. We go out of Sziget in the region. The first 2 years we were out of Sziget. Now we are across Romania. Unfortunately, this year, in March, we were supposed to launch a national European exhibit dealing with the Jewish heritage across Europe.
Okay.
We didn't launch it. Hopefully in 2 months we will launch via the Zoom. But that was like a very, very special program that we were supposed to, to present. I also work with the American Embassy or the German Embassy or the Goethe Institute. You know, I come from Canada, so we usually have co-sponsorship of programs. And this way, you also expand your visibility on one hand, but also who your partners are.
Yeah.
So I brought a singer, and one of the plays where that we produced was assisted by the Goethe Institute, and so on and so forth. It does help that I speak the language, and you know, I'm also very cool. I'm not, you know, very buck.
You're hip and with it.
Yeah, you know, so it's easier for the kids. It's so nice, especially in Siget. I walk on the street and the kids say, hi, how are you? Sometimes I don't even remember who they are. So I ask them, please tell me what school you're from. So
the first thing actually I noticed about you from the photographs was how arty you looked, and how
thank you.
Fussy, do you know, non-fussy, and somebody that, and very approachable, somebody that you could, that students, I mean, I've been lecturing quite often now on Holocaust studies and on Judaism and Islam. I was part of this course, a module that was doing world religions. So you were looking at all different religions and this, and how much we have in common, you know, and how much we, you know, we're more alike than, you know, if we can manage to break through these barriers that we have. But I also did a module on Holocaust studies and things like that. And I suppose you try your utmost to be approachable with students, because it's a tough subject, but you want to teach it to them, because one of the modules I did with them was creativity and the Holocaust, and creativity, and trying to bring such a horrific subject to them in, and get them creating this. And it was amazing, the final projects that came out. One in particular was about well, two were on the Holocaust, and they were just extraordinary pieces of work from students, just amazing. There was lots of fantastic creativity came out of it, from people who probably mightn't have read about it in a book, but they were able, because they were creative, they were able to actually represent it and tell the story through clay or through different media, and I thought that was exciting. But it's also nice to be able to feel that they can actually approach you, and that they're, you know, because
well, what we did, I'm very happy what you were just saying, because it gives me a good feeling that it's not just by us, but you know, it's much more expanded. 2 years ago, we commissioned an artist that does caricatures.
Okay.
Yeah, from Bucharest. She's very famous. And we did a project in 3 schools. There is a total of 7 schools in Siget. Now, Siget is a community on the border with Ukraine and Hungary. Therefore, there is a Ukrainian school, there is a Hungarian school, and 5 Romanian schools. And out of the 5 Romanian, 2 are what we call nicely professionals, meaning that they don't do their matriculation. They just study trade.
Okay.
And the other 3 are more academic. So we took 3 schools, and I always go to these that get less, not the academic. And what we did, we divided, we had 70 kids, 70, and we divided them into 4 groups. One group actually went around the city with me, and I said to them, you've passed through this street so many times. Have you ever seen the house of Elie Wiesel? No. You know, they go through and they don't know where they are. So we did a walking tour of the city of Siget and pointing out certain locations that had a Jewish meaning.
Yeah.
Of the past. Another group was a poetry group. Another one was a dance and free movement. That came an amazing program. And the last one was for the readers. However, they had to combine the reading with theater. It was a whole week from a Monday till a Thursday. And on Friday, each group performed in front of all the rest of the students.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
500.
That must have been
So,
fun.
yeah, we were really interested to repeat it this year again, you know, because we got some extra funds from somewhere. But, you know, hopefully next year or who knows when.
Please God, I mean, you know, how is COVID affecting?
City?
Yeah, affecting you. You know,
Affecting me personally?
Your project and
Oh, my project. Everything is on stop. The community there is also in sort of a semi-lockdown. The high schools are not coming, the students are not coming to the city because it's a regional high schools. They are regional high schools, so they don't commute. I am in touch with them, but they have to catch up on their own, so I'm not coming in with my little, I'm in touch with the principals, and of course I miss you, when are you coming, you know, things of such.
You are that type of person, I would imagine, that people would actually miss when you're not around, because you strike me as having so much energy that you're the one that's so much buzzing with energy that everyone is trying to keep up with you.
You are so right.
Yeah.
Now I stay in, so you can imagine yourself what that means for me. But
yeah,
naughty girl, I'm a naughty girl, and I do drive out and I do go and shop because according to the regulations, I belong to the risky age, thank God. You know, so I'm under the radar, the way we say.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, the thing about it is I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, you know, you're saying you're 70 years of age. You have the energy of a 30-year-old. I mean, you have set up this foundation, which is extraordinary. I mean, you have people running it as well. I would love to set up something like it in this country. I would love to set up, I've always said it, to set up some kind of foundation here in my own city that's in Holocaust education. And I'm in awe of your energy. And I just think that COVID saying things, you know, this constant going on about people when they reach a certain age, it's got nothing to do with age. It's got to do with inner, with how you feel internally. There are people half your age who are probably more vulnerable health-wise and physicality. They don't have the energy. I don't think they should be labeling people, oh, you're 70, so you're vulnerable, you've got to stay in. It's almost like they're stigmatizing people because of their...
Definitely. I agree with you. Well, that's why I'm a sort of, you know, against it. Seriously, if you are interested to establish something, I would love to assist you on the matter. And I think it's extremely important in many parts of the world, and especially in Europe these days, to establish such institutions, organizations, something.
I'm in a country here that, you know, it's very small. I'm in Ireland, and I'm probably I am probably the only person to have done literature about childhood under Nazism.
Why? That's why
it's to get something established here financially and to get funding here in Ireland, because it's such small. We're only 4 million people.
Mhm.
this country, and you know, it's not, we don't have we have a very, 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 very small Jewish community in
Right,
Ireland, mostly in Dublin. I live in Limerick.
right. It
And
used to be much larger.
but Limerick, I think, is the most appropriate place for it, because we had what was seen as a pogrom in Limerick in 1919, I think it was, and where the small Jewish community felt compelled to move to Cork and to Dublin because of discrimination. No one was killed, but it was just boycotting of shops and things like that, and stores, and people were forced out. And I do think that this is a city that would be perfect for something like an education or a memorial to, you know, a foundation here in Limerick. Because I think it would be, because I received a civic reception from the mayor here of Limerick, and for my Holocaust research. And it's ironic that so many years ago we had the pogrom in the city, and then I get a civic reception from the mayor of this city. And I'm proud to say that our council here in Limerick were one of the few councils to refuse to boycott Israeli goods.
Very good.
So, you know, I mean, I think Limerick is...
You were telling me of so many positive things that are. I think you have to gather these people together around the table with someone from the Minister of Education and from the religion group, like a priest or somebody, young people, and open like a brainstorm discussion and see where it can take some time, but it sounds to me that you have some very important personalities that can make a change, can start something.
Yeah.
And as I said, I wouldn't mind, you know, to be
honored.
Help you.
Honored.
Yeah, because it's extremely important. Every location needs. And I wanted to mention something. Psychologically proven that high school students age 16 to 18 type of thing do not have a concept of history. We are now already 80 years since the war started. It sounds so far away. Therefore, we have to think about new ways of teaching the subject. And that brings me to something that has just happened last week. I don't know if you got a chance to read, but in the States, in United States of America, there's about 25 states that the study of Holocaust is compulsory.
That's right. I know that under the Trump Foundation, under the Trump presidency, I think he's implementing it as being compulsory.
Yeah, but it started earlier, but now he's pushing more. But the Claims Conference, which is an organization that was dealing with the monies restitution coming from Germany, assigned a company to do research about the Generation Z. How much do they know about Holocaust? So they asked 11,000 students from across United States, ages 16 to 25, and I am simply ashamed. Ever the message, how much they know.
Apparently under 40 years of age, very few people know about the
Holocaust. Exactly, because also in the States, people, families are spread, so there's no more grandparents that live together the way we used to, and so on. So unless they're being taught or they read or they have some interest, the subject is lost. So one of the things that they were saying was that we have to change our methods. We have to think the way we improved or change the methods of general teaching in education then maybe we need to change this as well in order to make sure, as much as the cliche saying never again, to make sure that things such as this are not happening.
Where do you anticipate your project? I know COVID has messed everything up. It's quite difficult to see the future. You have so many aspirations, and then suddenly they're just thrown into disarray. But where did you see prior to COVID-19 outbreak? Where did you see your project going to? Had you plans? Had you
plans for across Romania to expand much more? But one project that I am encouraging a lot of people my age, second and third generation, is to write the family history. I'm doing the same thing, and this is a project that is good during a COVID lockdown, lockout, whatever the situation is. And I'm going to start after the high holidays in the middle of October I have 2 pages on Facebook. So I'm going to start to assist people, train people with a few sessions on how to start on this project. I think that this is just another way of teaching our own people. Not that all Jews or all Israeli kids know the stories of their families. Contrary, not. So this is what is in me right now doing. I can do for Siget. Siget is going to, as a matter of fact, I just finalized the process of launching this national exhibit, and we'll take it from there, see how long it takes.
Do you think that Israeli children, are they very well up on what happened during the Shoah, or are they? Are the younger generation trying to move on with their lives and trying to I suppose, I won't say forget about the past, but are they, are they as connected with the past or with their parents and grandparents' past as you'd like? I'm thinking now, I interviewed a professor there last week who was from Israel as well, and she did her PhD on the Israeli Defense Force, the survivors who became members of the Israeli Defense Force. And then she went on and did a further project on those that volunteered for the Israeli Air Force. And out of 160 pilots in the Israeli Air Force, I think 100 of them, or 300, out of 300 pilots, there was 175 of them were Holocaust survivors. And they do an awful lot within the Israeli Air Force to try and educate the young in what happened to their grandparents or their parents and that. Do you find that education is good in Israel with regards to Holocaust education? Or could it be better?
Degree it is. To another degree, I would like to see more. So let me say the following. There is a very good roots project that, boys and girls, when they become 12 years old, is a bat mitzvah, and 13 is a bar mitzvah. And it's the first step of maturity. So in all the elementary schools, a year before, meaning when you're 11 or 12, you are assigned as a student for this family roots project. So it's good. They go home, they have an outline, and they start to speak to their families. They dig out pictures and so on. But not all families come from European descendants. Sometimes sometimes if it's a mixed marriage, mixed in the sense of Sephardi and Ashkenazi, then they know. Otherwise, there's another opportunity. Many of the high school students a year before graduating and going to the army, meaning in grade 11, they are taking groups to Poland to visit some of the camps and definitely Auschwitz. So they are being taught or trained before they go about the history. They get some information. So that's another way of reaching more high school students. But on the whole, I personally feel needs more, because I feel that part of it brings that high school student who will go to the army, who will be finished with the army service and starting a life in the country, he or she is going to have a certain feeling for this country, for the people. Not that they don't have, but they are so much into the telephone, all the rest of the high technology, that they lose the touch. You know, there is a funny picture of a family getting together at the grandma on Friday. Try to imagine. And everybody is playing with it. And they don't talk to grandma. And grandma looks at them like this, like, why did you come to see me? You get the message.
Yeah. It's kind of like I interviewed a lady, Jane Yolland, and she's very famous actually because she wrote Briar Rose and she wrote The Devil's Arithmetic. And
yes, I remember her.
And both remarkable books.
Correct.
Well, in particular, The Devil's Arithmetic struck me when she was so bored listening to her grandparents' stories and looking at her grandfather's tattoo on his arm and not really knowing, because the tattoo was starting to fade and get wrinkly and lose its clarity. And she was so sick of listening to it, and she just did not want to go to Passover meal, or she wanted to do anything but go and have to listen to these endless stories of the past. But gradually towards the book, she started to become part of that past through, it was really fictional and science fictional in the sense that she stepped back in time and became her grandmother in the past. So she actually was metaphorically stepping into the past and understanding it from the perspective of somebody who had actually experienced it. So it gave her, when she actually came round, it gave her a whole sense of what her grandparents had suffered and their past that she just didn't really want to know. And I suppose really she was the present day child with the mobile phone in their hand, not wanting to be either part of the present or part of the past.
Yes.
Do you know, they're in their own world. They don't want to be part of this world or the world.
Very much. Very much in their own world, and I don't think that is good. A lot, I mean, this doesn't have to do with the Holocaust studies, but a lot of the things that we learned to memorize and to use more our brain rather than every you have an app and you find it and you look up and you know it's nothing of a self-initiative so much.
Yeah.
I find that yeah. Would you believe I haven't been into Israel for 50 years while I was living in Canada, but of course I would come and visit. But I remember almost all the roads that my father would drive in the first 20 years of Israel, 50 to 70. And I don't take the highways. I take those old roads. So, and I remember them. And today, everything is Waze. Put down Waze or whatever company you have that shows you how to get somewhere, you know.
Put your sat nav on.
Exactly. Now, we used to navigate on a map and all those things. There's so many things that this generation looks upon us when I tell.
I know, I wouldn't have a clue how to navigate on a map. I just turn my Mr. Google on and it brings me right to the door. I get lost. I have no sense of direction at all. But Peninah, it was
Yes.
an absolute joy having you on here today. I
The
felt
same.
like I feel like I've known you all my life.
Thank you.
It's just
very
so
good.
I just, you know, sometimes you feel you found somebody that is almost a kindred spirit, really, in a sense, because you're into the same things as I'm into. You're into the creativity, but as well as that, the history, and finding ways of trying to bring that story to people who come from a multitude of backgrounds, both I suppose socially, religiously, and creatively, you know. So thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you. God bless.
And you, shalom.
Shalom.